Then I would like to welcome everyone here at Joined. We are looking forward to spending the next hour with all of you. My name is Daria, and I'm the content manager here at Joined, and it's my pleasure to be moderating today's session. Before we go right into the session, I would like to give you guys a quick overview of how we structured today's webinar so that you can get a bit of a better idea of what to expect. So first of all, we will briefly talk about who we are and what we do, and then Fabian and Morten will introduce themselves. After that, we will go, or both of them will go into the future of audio networking and talk about the importance of open standards, current trends, and also the role of JOYNED in this industry. And then after that, after roughly 20 minutes, it will be your time to shine and to ask all your questions to Morten and Fabian. And with that all being said, giving you a bit of a structure of today's webinar, we want to introduce JOYNED to you. We are an innovative company and we're based in Austria. And we specialize in audio network technology that simplifies complex audio systems for professionals in industry like live sound and installation. And our goal is to make audio management more flexible, scalable, and intuitive. And with that, let's get started and hear more from Morten and Fabian. Fabian, would you like to start introducing yourself?
Sure, thank you, Daria. Yeah, I'm Fabian. I'm the founder and CEO of JOYNED, and yeah, I've been involved in the standardization, especially of ABB Milan, since 2016. Back then, I was working on behalf of DNB Audio Technic, initiating the Milan standard. And back then, I met Morten then already in 2018, and also we were tough competitors. We had a common goal to standardize network technology to make that usable for audio streaming in a professional context. And what I've learned there is it's great to have an open standard, but it's still just a stack of paper and someone needs to implement that. And that's where the idea came from, to found JOYNED in order to implement software that can be provided to you as manufacturers of audio products, to make it easier to adopt those standards.
And Morten, what about you? Who are you?
Oh, I don't know. So yeah, I have a long history in the audio market. Started back in the late '80s, and quickly started to work with digital audio, the transport of digital audio, the timing and the synchronization of digital audio. Also been involved in standards work all my life, and it was also through that I met Fabian, and I'm very excited to now have joined this company to fulfill that vision that Fabian just presented.
Yep, thank you so much for introducing yourselves, Morten and Fabian. Fabian, can you tell us more about the idea and the vision behind JOYNED?
Yeah, I think most important is to point out our mission. We really want to democratize network technology for the audio market. And what we need for that is open standards. We really think that open standards is the way to go to have a sustainable, future-proof solution. And the way we do that is by providing software that enables open standards in audio products.
Okay, I hope, thank you for sharing that. And I really hope that all of you online got a bit of a better idea of who we are and especially who these two gentlemen are. Now, Morten and Fabian will be talking more about the future of audio networking.
Yeah, and I think before we get into that, I would ask Morten maybe to point out the importance of open standards, as you have a long history in working in standardization committees, right?
Oh yeah, I think very early in my career, I was hijacked by the AES to help create a standard for sound system control. I think we were probably a little bit too early, but eventually AES succeeded in that, and so I've been involved in lots of standard works. Both AES, I'm chairman of SCO 212 for the AES, for example. I am working with IEEE standards, and of course with the Avenue standards, which are the ones covering Milan and ABB, and the SCO 212 AES is covering AES 67 as well. So standards are very important. Actually, it's a little anecdote because I think we all tried to implement our proprietary networks, and sometimes it was necessary because the standards weren't there. And I always look at this. Back in the 90s, I'm from way before we had cell phones. So cell phones were something that arrived later in my life. And we all saw in the movies back then, all the rich people had big cell phones, and they didn't really hit the main market because the different companies in the US that made cell phones, they each had their own proprietary standard, and they couldn't share their network, they couldn't share their R&D and their ideas, and then the Europeans came up with GSM, and boom, then it exploded, and that's why we all have a cell phone in our pocket nowadays, rich and poor. So, I mean, just a little example of how open standards can open up things.
Yeah, and what's your vision? Like, what will audio devices look like 3 years from now?
Well, I think over the next 3 years, a lot of what we call the legacy connectors and the legacy ways of transporting audio will slowly disappear, because the value of networking, the value of network intelligence is just so big that when you reach that tipping point, these old connectors will quickly go away. I mean, can ask you folks out there, how many of you had a cell phone 5 years ago that had an analog headphone jack? You don't have to raise your hands, because I know it's probably most of you. And so now, 5 years later, how many of you have a cell phone that has an analog jack? No, because you don't need it anymore.
I don't.
Yeah, I don't need it. So that's a good example of when it reaches that tipping point, it goes really fast, especially if the standards are open.
So if this analogy applies to the audio market, that would mean that connectors like the analog XLR connector on an amplifier, for instance, could go away, right? Because so far, network has just been added on top of these legacy interfaces like AS3, analog, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, at the edges, we'll still have it, right? Because, I mean, until we get that chip in our head, we'll still have to turn sound waves into electrical signals and bring them into our digital network. We'll still have to turn sound waves into moving air so we can hear it in our ears. But otherwise, there's not really any good reason to use anything but digital in between. So.
And what about signal processing? Currently, it's often very centralized to do a lot of signal processing, right?
Yeah.
Will it remain like that, or do you think?
Well, I think it's impossible to say exactly what will happen, right? When the GSM standard had this little text message thing that was envisioned, that was being used to control machines, and then somebody got the idea of writing text to each other, and now we have text messaging. But from my point of view, I think a lot of the centralization of processing, it has happened because there weren't the means to decentralize it, because there weren't the networking, and then you would have to have a lot of cables and multi-cables, and there weren't any standard for doing that. As soon as the network intelligence enables distribution will happen. It might be that if you're a mixing engineer, it still makes sense to have a centralized control surface, maybe or maybe not, but if it does, that's fine. That's the control surface. That doesn't mean that the processing has to be centralized as well. So things like that will happen. Maybe not exactly as we envision it, but.
All right. Fabian, I got a question for you. What is JOYNED's role now in the industry?
So the way we see our role is actually that we're not reinventing the wheel. We rely on open standards, and we do that together with other companies defining these standards. So this is a collaborative effort to do the standardization, but then someone needs to implement that. And this complexity is mostly in the software. So we believe that most manufacturers have either the capability to make electronics their own, or they have established partners doing that. And what we deliver is the software to manage all the protocols with full integration. So what we have so far is a solution for XMOS microcontrollers. We now can also support any ARM platform basically with our new libraries. And one of the next things we also want to unlock is making ABB bridges. So all this is available as software solutions, always with a commitment for open standards. And another important thing we noticed as we started a series of webinars where we also had not only manufacturers joining, but also a lot of users, sound engineers, musicians joining, we see that there is really a high interest in the market to pick that new technologies up. And therefore, I think it's also very important to educate the market, educate manufacturers. And this is also something we as Joint want to support.
I actually want to just throw a little bit in here as well. It's like when we say open standards, it's because we believe that only with, as I mentioned before, only with open standards can we reach that tipping point. But also, as putting on the manufacturer's hat, if you have solutions that are very much based on single source, maybe single source of the ideas, the rights to the technology, the hardware that executes the technology, you as a manufacturer put yourself in a situation where you're not in control of your network. And so we believe in open standards, and there are several open standards right now, and it's not that we necessarily think that there should only be one open standard, because there are different applications, there's different areas. Sometimes you need to go really, really far, but it's not so important that the sound is presented at the same time. But at other times, you are in a performance space where you might have line arrays, and if the speakers don't play at exactly the time you want them to play, then it doesn't work. And it might not be the same network, open standard that fulfills both of them, and therefore, through open standards, you can also convert between them, and they can meet in these well-defined points.
So to name them, the ones we consider as relevant at the moment is, of course, ABB Milan, as we have a background there, but we also have a background in standardizing control with OCA or AE70, AES67 is obviously very relevant in the market right now.
ST2110.
Yeah. 702110 as well. So these are also solutions we are looking into.
Okay. Fabian, Morten, how are you guys feeling? Are you ready for the questions from our online audience?
Sure, let's go ahead. Just want to close this intro with underlining our commitment for open standards. I believe it's really important for manufacturers to focus their resources on generating their USPs. We are happy to help with the integration of network technology. That's what we're here for. And we're happy to build the future of networking together with you. And I'm super curious to hear your questions, your thoughts about the situation in the market, about your challenges. So really excited to get into this Q&A session now.